Asking is not a weakness. Asking is empowerment.
Welcome to Talking About Kids. I am your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. It's not uncommon to hear divorces and adoptions described as finalized. However, if you've been through either, you know that the most difficult parenting begins after the legal documents are executed. My guest this episode is Ronald Platt, co-founder of the National Association for Single and Divorced Families. NASDF exists to support parents with vetted resources that save time and promote well-being and stability. Ron and I explore the experiences that prompted him to start NASDF and those things that we all can do to help single and divorced families. Talking About Kids is sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. If you find the information in this episode valuable, please like it, follow the channel, and share it with your friends and colleagues. And now, the interview.
I went to visit a friend of mine in LA who I was expecting to have a really fun time with. And I got off the plane and he said, "Hey, I know you weren't expecting this, but I'm getting my foster kit today. Do you mind taking the journey with me?" And I thought, yeah, I'm a pretty open guy. Yeah, let's try it. This sounds exciting. So I watched him with this 6-year-old young kid, and apparently he had been the child's big brother for some time. And the opportunity for him to be a foster parent to the child came up, and he took it. And I watched the two of them. It was interesting. They have like a history book for foster kids about what they've gone through, and he and I were sitting at the kitchen table reading it, and all these horrific things were coming up about this child. And we're sitting there watching him on the floor, and he's coloring and he's smiling and he just seems like a wonderful person. My friend never experienced any of the things that were in this book. The child had its own history with my friend. And I remember looking at the two of them saying, I could do this. I was single at the time, and I've always had a passion for children. I was a youth group advisor for a short time with a couple of Jewish organizations. And I thought I could do this. And what happened is I came back, I went to a network event, and there was a lady that got up and said, "I'm looking for single and coupled LGBTQT adults to take in LGBTQT children." And I thought, I looked up at God and went, "Really?" Like, what are the options? So I immediately stepped forward. I said, "I'm in." And like 8 weeks later, after training, we got my license, and she said, "Here's your license, and there's your kid." I was like, "Whoa, wait a minute! I've never met this kid before. Can I have a couple of days?" And she said, "Yeah, you got 2 days. He's homeless. Speed it up. Let's decide." So I spent the next 2 full days with him, taking him to lunch, going to dinner. I didn't even have a bedroom set up for him yet. So I took him to the furniture store. I said, "Pick out whatever set you want." And he's like, no foster parents ever said that to me before. And what I realized is that I ended up taking him in, of course. He was 13 at the time. And the challenges that I had getting him certain services that the foster care system promised me that just didn't come through. For example, I wanted to make sure he was receiving mental health care. And I would take him to the therapist once a week, and he'd get back in the car with me, and he called me dad at a very early start and said, "Dad, I can't keep telling my story over and over again. They keep giving me a different therapist every day, every week." So I called up his caseworker and said, What's the deal?" She said, we can't hold on to them." She said, and I apologize, but that's the best we can do." So I ended up putting him in private therapy sessions, which definitely helped him. The challenges that I had as far as disciplining, we discipline based on how we were brought up, right?
Mhm.
So My father was very strict. My mother was very strict. So I was trying to be very strict with the kid, but he had a lot of baggage that he came with, right? He
Mhm.
came from homes where he was either physically abused, mentally abused, unloved, things of that nature. So I had to try to tailor it. And I was very naive at the time. And we kind of learned together as to how
Mhm.
best. I was in contact with his mother, who was very happy that he was in my home, and she would fill me in on pieces of information that I needed. Um, there were some challenges. He, at the time, was in a special needs junior high school, getting ready to go into high school, and they wanted to put him into the special needs high school. And when I went down there to meet with them, I asked why. I don't understand. He's, seems perfectly fine. They couldn't really give me an example other than he had been in a couple of fights, and they didn't feel that he should be in. He was a very tall kid for his age, and they didn't feel he should be in a regular high school. So I went ahead, went through the process, argued with them, got him retested, everything else. He turned out to be he was fine, and I was able to put him in a regular public school. I was not in a great schools district, so I was able to use the voucher program and put him
Mhm.
into a better school in a different neighborhood. And I think he lasted about 3 to 4 months before he was thrown out the first time. And then, of course, I sat with the school principal, got him back in. So through these challenges of just dealing with him got me to understand the difficulties of what it's like to be a parent, and as a
Mhm.
single parent. I think that my other experiences with friends that I've had, that I had a business partner at the time that was just leaving a very abusive relationship. He was very wealthy. She was struggling. She had to hire an attorney to get her child to get full custody of her child. And I literally went with her to courts to watch this court system that was failing these kids and these parents who rightfully should have custody of these children. It went on for 10 years.
Mm.
And it wasn't until that daughter of hers turned 16 that when the father came to pick her up, she called the police and said, I don't want to go with him. And the police said, you don't have to. That's what ended up deciding the custody. It wasn't the courts, because the courts always wanted psychological evaluations and they
Yeah.
wanted the financials. And then he wouldn't supply him, or he would make an excuse, or the attorney would refile, or he'd hire another attorney. And it was always literally for 10 years worth of changes that were going on. Uh, I saw a police officer friend of ours, male police officer, that was leaving his abusive wife, and he was trying to get custody of his children. And every time he would go to the courts to get custody, again, it would be another issue. She would say, well,
Mhm.
he abused me. And then the police department have to do a full review on him. And meanwhile, the child was the one who was getting the abuse.
Yeah.
This was not a good situation for these children. I've spoken to ad litem representatives of these children, and they say they go to court and they express the needs of the child, but courts, their hands are tied at certain points
Mhm.
as to what they can
Mhm.
do. So what turned into be my passion is, how can I have a large enough voice to be the advocate for these children? What can I do to create a voice for these foster kids? When my husband and I went to look into doing foster care and we started taking the classes, a lot of the people that are there are not there necessarily for the children. I hate to say it, sometimes they're there for the stipend. Sometimes
Mhm.
they're there because their kids have grown up and they're bored and they don't know what else to do, so they want to bring in a child. The the difference between the classes that I took with the county versus the classes that I took with a private organization called JAFCO,
Mhm.
which is again, a private foster care system, were night and day.
Mm.
Even the type of people that were volunteering to take in these kids, it was a much better quality of people who truly wanted to have children, who wanted to help these children, versus
Right.
somebody who was uh, childless without kids at the time, and was looking for something to do.
Mm.
Right? These children come with a lot of situations that require care and concern and love that I think a lot of these people just don't give them. I go back one more step, and I remember taking my son to the pediatrician the first time, and the pediatrician was asking him all the questions, and I raised my hand. I went, "Hi, I'm the foster parent. Can you ask me these questions?" And he said, "Well, typically the foster parent just drops the kid off and tells him to take the city bus home." And I said, "Wait a minute.
Mm.
These children are ill. they're, they're
Mhm.
coming in with high fevers. They're coming in with aches and pains, and they literally drop them off at the doctor's and then tell them to take the city bus home." He goes, "Yeah, I don't. They very rarely get to meet the foster parent. So
Right.
a lot of these things were very shocking. I thought I've got to be able to do something to change this. So that was the beginning of my passion to form the association.
You've mentioned some of the obstacles that single and divorced parents face.
Hmm.
And goodness, so many of these are really resonating because this is an area that I both know personally, but professionally, trying to even disentangle webs of permission. Who has permission
Hmm.
to look at a record? Who has permission to look at a school record versus a medical record? Request medical services for a foster student, foster child. So yes, it's. I'm thinking of some very strange conversations and advocacy that I've done in the past. But what other sort of obstacles do you think single and divorced parents face? And were there any that surprised you, even as you were like, even after your own experience?
When you type in the word divorce on Google, you get about 3 pages of attorneys,
Mm,
not resources. So I think
right.
one of the biggest surprises was typing in the word divorce. What do I need? Well, okay, I need an attorney or a mediator, but I need services. I need a therapist. I might need a realtor to help me sell the house. I need formulas. I need diapers. I need a job.
Yeah.
I need help finding out what kind of career. How do I re-enter the workforce? Uh, Health insurance is so expensive now that I'm paying for it. Is there anything out there that can help me with deductibles and uh, you know, like I said, mediation services, uh, different products and services that I need when I'm in that process, or even looking for support groups.
Yeah.
Like I said, I have a child custody issue. Is there anybody that can give me free advice? You have to go to pages 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The resources are out there, but they're hard to find. And I
Right.
think when somebody is in the process of getting a divorce and they're trying to maintain a job and they're trying to raise children, the last thing they need to do is have to look through 5, 6, 7, 8 pages of Google before they get to what they need. So, what we wanted to do is act as an umbrella for these resources and products and things that people need and put them under just our one site. So that right now I know that my co-developer is going state by state with resources to see which are free resources, which are paid for resources, so that when they go to our website, which we're in the process of adding these on, if they're living in Florida, if they're living in Arizona, they can go and click
Mhm.
and see what different resources are there so that they don't have to get on the internet and search. It's part of our membership.
And when you talk about your organization, you are talking about the National Association for Single and Divorced Families that you're the co-founder of.
Correct.
And I found a lot of your services. First of all, the first time I was looking through the benefits of being a member and the services that you provide, there was a moment where I'm like, well, that's odd. And then and then the more I thought about it, I'm like, no, that actually tracks really well. So before we get into some of those services, and at the risk of stating the obvious, for somebody listening who might be might not be familiar with the plight of single or divorced families, and they are just encountering this for the first time, what are some of the dangers of letting these obstacles go unaddressed? So, what is the danger to the child when the single family doesn't have these resources, the kind of which you're trying to provide?
I'm going to start off with mental health care.
Mm,
I was fortunate when my parents divorced. I was 16 years old. My parents were very aware of what they were doing. It was a relatively friendly divorce,
yeah.
but they had placed a lot of responsibilities. I was a responsible kid. I grew up with a bunch of chores I had to do. I had a part-time job. I went to school. I was in the social committees. I mean, I
Right.
don't even know how I passed high school when I look back at my schedule. But when they decided they were getting a divorce and my father moved out, suddenly I became the husband. So suddenly
Yeah.
I was on top of everything else I was doing. My mother expected me to do more. And it got to a point where I had an outburst. And my mother ended up calling my dad over and they both sat me down and said, "Hey, we're sorry. This is a lot." And even though you're 16, I know that you don't need additional responsibilities. And we've been burdening you with sharing how bad your mom is to me or how bad your dad was to me. And we're going to cut all that out. But I think a lot of families, unfortunately, don't have civil breakups. And they have to understand what kind of mental concerns there are for those children. So, one of the biggest things we wanted to make sure we could provide is mental health care. With our membership, you get 3 free mental health services per condition. So, if you're having
Mm.
depression and anxiety, that would give you 6 free sessions, and then we discount the sessions thereafter. I think making sure that your child is able to understand what is going on and that because you're getting a divorce doesn't mean that you're losing a parent. This is
Hmm.
not a death situation. This is a separation situation. I think would be the number one priority is how are the children doing? Second, I would say is how are we communicating? Are we being
Hmm.
civil to each other? And I understand that a lot of times when there's a divorce, it's out of hatred, it's out of frustration, it's out of anger. But if there's a child involved, there's a certain level of responsibility that you have as to how the two of you act in front of that child.
Hmm.
Recently, my son was in the process of getting a divorce, and I take care of my granddaughter as much as I can because we love her to death. So any opportunity I can have her, I'll steal her away from them. But I had to emphasize to them as they began to argue and negotiate is, hey, you guys have to be civil to each other. If you didn't have a child, you could yell and scream and be as uncivilized as you
Hmm.
want. But you guys are tied into each other for the rest of her life.
Yep.
So how you interact with each other is going to reflect on her.
Well, we did an episode with the mediator, Karen McNanny, and she advocates for this child centered divorce. And one of her key tenets is that, you know, too many couples look at the divorce as the finish line.
Hmm.
We've got to we'll get the agreement, we'll figure out custody, we'll figure out who gets what, and then it's like, then you're done.
Hmm.
And to your point and to her point, and if you want to go back and listen to that episode, if you're listening to this, um, that's just the beginning.
Correct.
That is really where the real work begins. And so I really hear what you're saying. And the other thing too that I want to bring up, because you're not highlighting it now, but I recognize the importance of it. If you are a single parent, i- balancing that childcare, your professional needs, and little things like repairs can be very, very difficult. I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I was involved in a study about why people drop out of school
Hmm.
and the kind of things that prevent young adults from going back to school or staying with college when they're returning. And the number of people, single parents, that didn't continue their college education after starting it again, that didn't that dropped out again because of a car issue.
Mm.
Right. So it was astounding. Person after person dropped out of college the second time through after like struggling and making sacrifices to get back into it because they had a flat tire.
Hmm.
And that flat tire meant that they weren't able to get their kid to the daycare,
Hmm.
that the only one. And it meant that they got in trouble at their work. And that meant then that they couldn't pay for the repair right away, which then meant that they couldn't make their class. These are very delicate house of cards that some of our single parents and single families have. And so I was excited to see that these are some of the resources that you put up there. What do you need, a handyman? Do you
Right.
need or whatever the better term for that is now? So how did you go about assembling the kind of resources that you wanted to bring to families?
To your point that you just made, they say it takes a village.
Yeah.
And I think that is so true. We've found a couple of resources for parents where if that situation came up, that the
Hmm.
child had to be somewhere and suddenly the car breaks down, that there's a community out there that you can reach out to that says, hey, my car just broke down. Can you take my kid to school? Or can you take
Wow.
my kid to the doctors? we found some great women's organizations that actually do that. That it's called a moms
Mm.
group of sorts, and we're reaching out to more of those as well, and to dads as well, because I think dads are sometimes underserved
Hmm.
because they feel the responsibility is placed more on the mother. So these community type uh, help organizations
Hmm.
can help prevent some of those things. And we eventually want to bring that in house. We want to
Mm.
be the organizer of these villages, as I call them, these help villages, because we're all tied into each other. We're all in the same. We're all in the same destination. We've been divorced. We need help, and I think
Right.
that type of community really does the job. Is one of the outlets, of course.
We had an episode where we talked about to a guest, and we talked about the superwoman complex or the
Mm,
superwoman paradigm.
mhm,
And in my own experience, and I have to say, I'm not a single parent, but when I would drop my daughter off at school, we'd be in a line,
mhm.
and because at the time we were taking to her school that we had to drive to, and the men dropping their daughters off got help from the school, and the women dropping their children off didn't.
Hmm.
And I kept noticing this pattern. And when I learned of this, the kind of the first of all, the superwoman paradigm, but also how damaging that could be. I started to think about those experiences where when I showed up by myself as a parent in a parenting situation, I was given all of these given extra regard, given extra kudos. Oh, it's so great that a male is involved,
Mhm,
and given extra help. Oh, let me show you what to do. And I was looking at these other women that were doing it all
mhm,
without that help.
mhm.
And so, I think that what can we do to help counter this narrative that you have to do it on your own? What are you doing to help people feel okay reaching out for help and for services?
People asking for help is probably the single most difficult thing to do sometimes,
Yeah.
because I think asking for help is a sign of weakness.
Right.
And what I have found is when I can finally open up to somebody and share what's going on in my life, and they begin to
Mm.
open up and share what's going on in their life, we come to a lot of resolutions, and you realize that there's more people out there who want to help if you just
Mhm.
ask. Asking is not a weakness. Asking is
Right.
empowerment. I do think that more responsibility needs to be assumed by the father, and I'm not saying that fathers aren't stepping up to the plate, because I'm a dad and I certainly stepped up to the
Mhm.
plate 1,000 times. But I think the assumption is that the responsibility is placed on the mother,
Mm.
when the assumption should be that it's placed on both parents. And that just because you're getting a divorce doesn't mean that dad gets to work 24/7 and mom has to take on the responsibility. It has to be a 50-50
Right.
situation. And I think it's a sort of a mindset at the same time. But I think the biggest thing is asking is not a weakness.
Well, and I again, and I've talked about this on Talking About Kids many times before. So to my listeners, I apologize if I sound like a broken record here, but parents are judgy. They, it. Again, I was involved in this research project, and we were looking at the concerns of young parents. Young parents in the one project I did, the results seemed to suggest that they were more concerned about appearing to
Mhm,
be a bad parent than actually being one,
mhm,
right? So that, like, think about that they were more worried about being like being perceived by their peers or the other people around them as a bad parent than they were about being a bad parent. Now, I you can interpret that by saying that they actually felt pretty confident that they were good parents, but they still didn't want to look like one
mhm,
and it looked like a bad one,
mhm.
right? So this notion that you, especially when it comes to raising your child, might need assistance. I think it's something that we really need to do a lot of work on as a society
Mm.
to take that stigma away and say, no, we've all needed help. And people who didn't admit that they needed help are probably the ones that made some of the worst mistakes. Maybe, maybe. I don't have any data to back that up, but I'm going to throw that out there, Ron.
So there are a lot of mother and father support groups. that have videos, and there's podcasts on this. If you go to our Facebook page, NASDF, you will see that I'm constantly uploading different podcasts that are open to moms and dads about such subjects as this. I've
Yeah.
had articles that I put on there because I want people to be able to go there and say, "Oh, look, that's me."
Hmm.
And look what this, I'm not the only one in this situation. And I think a lot of times we think this is unique to my situation, and it's not. We're all going through the same stuff. So if you don't see a support group of some kind, try to maybe sit down with one of the teachers at the school and say, how many other single moms are out there that maybe we can form a support group for? Or sit down with the social worker at the school or something to this. Just reach out, because once you do that, you'll realize how many people come forward and go, "Oh my God, I was so looking forward to something like this.
Yeah.
I so need this group." If there isn't one already established, form one. And I know you're thinking, well, God, I've got to add that to the list of the things that I'm doing. But even if it's going out for coffee after you drop the kids off, or if it's dad takes the kids and the moms get together for, wine or something, or whatever it is, go meeting at a park, whatever, knowing that you've got that one, two, or three, or 10 different mothers or fathers that are out there that are all going through the same thing, these support groups are very helpful.
Well, and especially as we're in a climate where people are increasingly afraid to talk about the unique perspectives of their family
Hmm.
or of their kids. And you talked about foster parenting and LGBT plus kid. We're in like professionals in the field now who have developed programs to help families and to help LGBTQ plus youth with their unique perspective
Hmm.
and potentially, kind of their own set of what they need to thrive. They're feeling this pressure that they can't do that work anymore, or they're not allowed to respond to those needs. So, like, can you speak to that a little bit? Like, how are you feeling in this environment where these 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 groups of kids are being told that their issues don't seem to matter
Mm,
anymore?
yeah, it's especially with the current political situation the way it is. It seems like they are trying to erase us out of the equation,
Yeah.
and they're trying to take away a lot of the pride uh, social groups out of high school and things of that nature. It's tough. I think
Hmm.
even when I sit with a couple of my family members, and we were discussing how the state of Florida was trying to take, don't say gay. They were trying
Mm.
to take the gay books out, not even gay books, any controversial books out of the libraries. They were trying to cancel the pride socials at school. They were trying to eliminate any form of LGBTQ plus relationships either in school or outside of school, because that's the community they want to go after at the time. And when I sit with a couple of my family members, cousins in particular, and they say, "Well, I don't want my kid learning about gay sex in school," and I'm like, "They're not."
They're not. They're
I
not.
don't think I had sex ed until I got to senior high.
Yeah.
Honestly, and I'm like, I got to take the class. None of that
Yeah.
was now. Of course, I'm one of those kids born in the 60s, educated in the 70s. I think I'm a Generation X or whatever they call Gen Z.
Hmm.
So maybe they're teaching kids about sex ed at a younger age, but they're certainly not teaching gay sex or heterosexual sex. That it's something we all do. But the perception was that they're teaching a specific type of sexuality, or that they're pushing an agenda of some kind, and that's not the case. And that's when I have to sit down and educate them, going, "Well, your kids are in high school. Have you asked them?"
Yeah.
And what's interesting is I'm pretty sure that one of my cousin's kids is gay.
Hmm.
And I keep waiting for them to approach the subject. I'm watching him on social media now, and clearly he's more geared towards that. And I have yet to have them reach out. Like, if you really want information, talk to me. I'm here.
Mm.
But I think as far as the kids are concerned, thank God there are social groups outside of school that they can go with. I know here in Florida, Pride Lines is huge. In fact, that's where I saw my son the first time.
Yeah.
They couldn't identify him, but they said, "Oh, he's that kid sitting below the chair that's over there." And I was like, "Oh, that's the kid." But they couldn't. physically point him out to me. But what it was a place for all these kids to go to after school, and it had support groups, and it had classes, and it had different
Hmm.
things. There are these types of groups around the country for these youths if they feel that they're not getting them in school. But it is a particular challenge, especially for parents, because I think uh, parents who have accepted their child's sexuality are going to be more protective and more insistent that their child is represented in school in some way. So, if unfortunately, if the parent is not accepting of it, that
Right.
relates to more challenges for the child as well.
Well, and you started off by talking about your experiences as a foster parent and kids coming out of the foster care system. We just know the data are clear that they've had experiences that mean that they are there's going to be situations that are going to be harder for them than kids that didn't go through the foster care system.
Absolutely.
We and those can be sometimes extreme, but they just have different needs at different times.
Hmm.
They also have different aptitudes, different resiliencies
Hmm.
that we need to absolutely build upon. But there are going to be situations where their perspective is not going to be the same as most students in a given classroom.
Hmm.
Being able to recognize that is important to their health and happiness, and it has nothing to do, based on the science, with any sort of political agenda. We're just trying to help all kids succeed here.
Hmm.
And so I get really, it's illogical to me that in an environment that says we want to promote school vouchers, which you yourself used,
Hmm.
Ron, to find the right school for your kid. And the reason vouchers exist is because different students might have needs that aren't being met by their local school.
Correct.
So we acknowledge on one hand that some students might have unique needs.
Hmm.
And on the other hand, we say, yeah, but we're not gonna let you talk about your unique needs, or you talk about your unique needs, or you talk about your unique needs. So I believe that all kids need to be met where they are with as many resources as possible. So, again, but I know that the challenges of raising a kid in the foster care system, and way, way too many teens in the foster care system, are there because of their sexuality, their identity expression, and to think that we can just expect them to develop healthy without additional assistance and supports
And
it's mind-boggling.
what's
I don't
interesting
get it.
is one of the first things they cut out of the school budget, counselors,
Yeah, yeah.
or
Ah,
even the nurses.
right.
If you have an injury and you go down to get the nurses help at a school, they're cutting those out too. So even if you don't have a counselor, maybe the child would open up to the nurse if
Yeah.
God forbid they were being physically abused at home.
And we know they do,
Right.
by the way. I mean, the school nurses talk about this. They talk about their frequent flyers. Those kids that are going to the nurse over and over again, not because they're sick, although we also know that there are really real physical manifestations of the anxiety that they might be
Mhm.
feeling because they don't feel safe
Mhm.
in that classroom or in that environment, because they aren't seeing themselves reflected in the literature, in the teachings, or in some cases, maybe even vilified,
Mhm.
right? So, where the school nurses talk about this all the time. They know that this kid's going there for respite, not because they actually have a cold
Correct.
or something like that. So, you're right. It's ridiculous that these things get cut back.
It's interesting, when I was in junior high, there was a much taller kid that was harassing me,
Mm,
and, it made me nervous to go to classes. So, I didn't wanna get into a physical altercation with this kid because
yeah,
clearly he woulda kicked my butt. So I went to the vice principal, and I said, "So this kid is harassing me. What can you
yeah,
do?" And he says, "Stand up for yourself." I'm like, so he's like 6'2" and I'm 5 feet. I mean, clearly that's going to not end up, and we're going to end up getting into an altercation. He's either
yeah,
going to get suspended or I'm going to get suspended for having a fight. So what can you do? And they didn't do anything. It wasn't until I sat with my parents,
yeah.
and my mother and father came in and sat with the vice. I was blessed to have parents that cared, and they came in and said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "Well, what do you want us to do? Our hands are tied." He's, "No, they're not tied. This kid is harassing my kid." and it's going to lead to a physical altercation, whether it's out in the PE field or it's out in the men's room or the bathroom or whatever. There's going to be an altercation. And it wasn't until they were adamant about it that they finally removed the kid from my class,
Mm.
because he was already a troubled teen or a troubled kid, and now he
Right.
decided to take it out on me. But most kids don't have those types of advocates, or parents are so busy, and I'm not blaming parents, of course,
Yeah.
but the school system needs to be more aware that if a parent comes to them and says, "Hey, my kid needs some help," that that help is there for them. And unfortunately, like I keep saying, that's the first thing out of the budget that gets taken out, is that ability for that parent to go to school and say, "I need some help."
Right. But even in that scenario that you describe, Ron, like a single parent or a parent with, that doesn't have, that gets paid in an hourly job,
Mhm.
for example, um, getting time off to go into their kids' school by themselves, right? Maybe, and we know this is for many of our peers and many parents out there, school wasn't a great place for them when they went there. So going back into that environment can feel really dangerous,
Mhm.
right? There's so many emotions and so it's so charged up. So these are precisely the kind of parents that we need to support so that they can create these healthy experiences for their
And
kids.
that's part of what we're trying to create here with
Yeah,
our association. We realize that there's a lot of needs that parents and children need. So we want to be able to have, as we get larger, of course, once we get up to 5 or
right.
10,000 members, that we can start opening up these support groups for these parents, so that if they have, like, what do I do with my kid? He's
Right.
being harassed at school. What outlets are there? There are organizations that can help. It's
Yeah.
hard finding them, and we want to be able to have those resources for them.
In you said it so well just there, Ron, but I just want to give you another opportunity. Um, for we're out of time here, but if a single or divorced parent listening to this right now, what do you want them to know? What do you want them to maybe realize or hear that they aren't hearing enough, that they don't know, that they can take away from this particular podcast?
NASDF was set up specifically to work with single families and divorced individuals, not only to help them during and after the divorce, but to help them as a single parent. We want to be able to have our organization grow to a point where we're a one-stop shop. We often compare ourselves to AARP. AARP provides product, services, support, and resources for people 55 and plus, and they advocate for Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and elder fraud. We set up our organization exactly after them. In fact, we've met with them, and they're so
Mm.
pleased with what we're doing. They're mentoring me, which I take as a huge compliment for an organization that has 36 million members. So what we want to be able to do is provide those products, services, support, and discounts for our demographic, and that means, like, again, like I said, mental health care, discounts on daycare services, nursing, 24-hour nurse services. We want to be able to provide, even if you get a divorce and you need to sell your house, what we do is, if you use one of our affiliate realtors, we actually give you back 25% of whatever our commission is towards your closing costs, which
Oh,
nobody else
wow.
is doing, because we understand that you're having some financial difficulties. We have discounts for school supplies, computers through Lenovo and through Office Max and Office Depot. Um, uh, Financial services. We're trying to come up with a credit card that will work with attorneys, because I know recently a friend of mine was getting a divorce and she couldn't afford to hire the attorney because the husband wasn't giving her any money,
Mm.
and she didn't qualify for free attorneys because she was
Right.
still married, and it was predicated on his income, not hers.
Mm.
Now that she's divorced, she can get the free service, but during the divorce she couldn't. Well, I asked her, she said, "Well, I can't afford the retainer that the attorney's asking for because I have no money." Well, what if we had a credit card that worked with people, say, with a score of 500 or above, that would give you that credit card, like Care Credit does for
Hmm.
for your vet bills and for facial injections and things like that. I've actually reached out to them, and they said, "No, we don't do that." but a specific credit card that enables them to go ahead and charge that attorney. So if that attorney wants a $5,000 retainer, here's the credit card, let's get going. I'll pay it off after we settle up on the divorce. There's nothing like that on the market. We want to be able to establish those things. We understand that there are specific needs, both as a single parent and somebody getting divorced, that we can fulfill for them. As our membership continues to grow, when we get to 5, 10,000 members, now I can go back to companies like Publix and Kroger and Safeway and Target and all these other companies and say, what kind of discounts can you give me for children's clothes, for diaper services, for, formulas, things of that nature, which we already offer, but we want to be able to increase those discounts. We want to have a whole site set up where you can go for support. And we laugh that eventually when we get to a point, we'll actually have a dating site on there for people who have now realized what it's like to be loved unconditionally. And I'm ready to start a new relationship. And then we joke even further, maybe we'll pay for weddings someday. When one of our members gets a free wedding. The career services is very extensive to help people figure out what it is that they want to do when they grow up and then how to pursue that job career. These are all free services. So the bigger we get, the more we can offer. And that's just like AARP. We want to be able to take our membership from $19 a month to $19 a year, God willing. But that's way in the future at the moment. So that's what we're hoping to achieve.
Well, Ron, I'm so excited about what you're doing for single and divorced families, and thank you so much for sharing that on Talking About Kids.
Absolutely. One of my favorite topics.
That was Ronald Platt. More information about Ron and the National Association for Single and Divorced Families is at talkingaboutkids.com. And when you do visit talkingaboutkids.com, send me a note. Let me know what you think. I read every bit of feedback. The Talking About Kids theme song is by The Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and young humans. And the difference is that young goats are easier to manage.